Hello and welcome back to the channel. It's a Necron day and today we're going to be doing another video in the Know Your Foe series. This time we're going to be looking at some of the things you need to be looking at for when you're going up against 1,000 Suns. It's one of the Chaos factions within the 40k universe. So we're going to be going through the video, we're going to be referring to Necron units in terms of how we can deal with those Chaos units and their powers. And then later in the video I'm going to be going over a strategy on how to deal with them as a whole. And of course, our shout out of the day will be in the summary section too. So let's get on with the video today. So at the time of filming this video, the 1,000 Suns have just got a new codex alongside the Grey Knights. Both are very psycho heavy factions, and we'll hopefully do a deep dive into the Grey Knights at some point later in the year. But due to them both being quite a psycho heavy faction and of course the codex creep, there's going to be a change in the dynamics slightly and the metas are going to have changed. So therefore how we play our underperforming Necrons will also have to change. For example, making better use of the Zarakan dynasty, but we'll go over that later in the video. So let's begin with the basic abilities that the 1,000 Suns have access to, as you may or may not be familiar with the detachment abilities. So if you don't play them, or you simply don't come across them that often, we're going to quickly glance at all their abilities before we begin with the units. So as for the detachment rules, so 1,000 Suns detachments gains the Mere Servants ability and the Jealous Tyrant ability, and they also gain the Brotherhood of Sorcerers ability. And then furthermore, all Rubric Marines and Scarab Occult Terminators and Bray units within 1,000 Suns detachments gain the Objective Secured ability. So let's quickly go through those actual points just so we know where we are. The Mere Servants ability isn't so much going to affect us Necron players too much. So it's more about the 1,000 Suns players. When they're building their list, they cannot include more 1,000 Suns cultist units than they've got Rubric Marines or the Scarab Occult Terminators. Then they cannot include more Bray units than they do Rubric Marines and the Scarab Occult Terminators again. So it's not going to affect us, it's more about the list build for them. Then the Jealous Tyrant ability, you can only include a maximum of one Demon Prince in each detachment. Quite like our Catan charge, you can only have one per detachment there. Then the Brotherhood of Sorcerers, so this is going to be a +1 to psychic test for the unit. So it's army wide, and not only that, if they're an Arcana Astani's unit or a Tazango unit, they're going to get a 5+ invulnerable saves. That's going to be most of the faction. That's not going to include things like cultists, but a lot of the 1,000 Suns units have got one of those keywords. Okay, so far so good in terms of simplicity, but as you've seen from recent codexes such as the Drukhari and the Sisters of Battle, new releases tend to get a little bit more complex. They want us to add our own custom flavour to our armies. So most units available to the 1,000 Suns have the Great Cult keyword, which is effectively the equivalent of a dynasty or a chapter. And because this is a Zenith's faction, they're going to have that magic number of 9 Great Cults to select from. Now we aren't going to be going through each and every one of these Great Cults in great detail. This is just an overview of what to expect. Of course, each Great Cult will have its own general playstyle, which aids the unpredictability of playing against the faction. But long story short, each Great Cult receives a unique psychic power, a unique warlord trait, and a unique relic, otherwise here known as a Sorcerer's Arcana. So I'm going to quickly show you all 9 of the cults, so simply pause the video on the relevant cult that you're facing for more info, because there's quite a lot of information there, and that would be quite a long video in itself. So to further add to the chaos, if all the units within the faction are from the 1,000 Suns, then the player gains access to the Kabalistic rituals. So this is a new ability which happens in the psychic phase. So the player gains points that they can spend on buffs and bonuses, and they simply get these points by having models within the battlefield. So I've displayed the table here to show how many points each unit gets within that phase. For example, if they've got a 1,000 Suns Demon Prince on the battlefield, then they're going to gain 3 points. Then if they've got an Aspiring Sorcerer, they'll gain another point there, and they're all going to total up. Then they're to be spent in that same psychic phase on a number of options. Again, I'm going to display the ways of how to spend these points, but bear in mind points do not carry over onto the next psychic phase, so any unspent points go in the bin. So there's some real powerful ones here. Just for an example, the one right in the center there for 4 Cabal points echoes from the warp. So they can use this rich in the psychic phase. They select a Psyker, and until the end of the phase the unit can perform a following action, which is the echoes from the warp psychic action. Its warp charge value of a 3, and if successful they simply gain a command point. That's one of the more cheaper ones in terms of Cabal points. As you can see, the one in the bottom right corner for 9 Cabal points, and it simply adds 2 to the psychic test. So they're getting this kind of expenditure every single psychic phase. Then furthermore, like every codex, the book has a full page of character add-ons. Unfortunately, our Necron codex is somewhat underwhelming with a Cryptic Arcana page. Now the 1,000 Suns have what's called a Legion Command. So as you can see from the image here, all the sorcerers have an upgrade option, and quite frankly this makes our Arcana page look like utter trash. Firstly, arguably only 2 of our Cryptics are strong enough to field. The Plasmancer is in a grey area. Then most of the Arcanas themselves kind of suck. There is a couple of decent options in there, but I don't feel like they blend with the Codex as a whole. But looking at these options here, for example, the one at the very top with an Exalted Sorcerer for 25 points, they can attempt to manifest 1 additional psychic power in the psychic phase. So that could be Smite, for example, for D3 mortal wounds. every single turn for 25 points in total. Again, comparing our Arcana to the Legion command, virtually every upgrade here is really reliable, really valuable. When you combine it with the great cult options that we've just mentioned earlier, and the Cabal points that they can spend as well, you can muster up some real potent lists. Plus with the Codex, Psychics are the main thing behind this book. Cryptex are merely a supporting cast member. Okay, so let's move on to the actual psychic powers. So most of the psychic models can cast psychic powers from one of two psychic disciplines. There's the discipline of chance and the discipline of vengeance. And it's an and or situation, so they aren't tied down to one particular discipline. Don't forget they get one of their unique great cult powers too. Then further to add to this, the new Infernal Masters have a unique table of powers for them to use within the command phase, which is basically like a version of their litanies, like a chaplain for the Space Marines. But they're also psychers too. So in the command phase they're effectively doing their litanies, and then in the psychic phase they're a psyker, so they're extremely strong support characters, psychic chaplains, insane. Okay, so let's make our way to the actual units available to the Thousand Suns. So the main named Chaos Sorcerer within the faction is Araman. His stats are pretty much what you'd expect from an infantry character model. Unless you put him on a disc of Zinch, then he becomes a cavalry model that can fly and is obviously a lot quicker. Now he does pack quite a punch in melee with 5 attacks at strength 7, 3 damage a pop, that's with the black staff, or 10 attacks at strength 4 with the disc blades. In the psychic phase he's going to be re-rolling all the psychic tests, and of course he's getting the faction detachment bonuses such as a +1 to the cast of those psychic powers, and he can actually cast 3 powers and deny 3 as standard. Then furthermore, core units within 6s get to reroll hit rolls of a 1, 2. Worth mentioning here that he can go into any of the great cult sub-factions. That goes for Magnus too, which we will get onto later in the video. Neither of them have the great cult keyword, so it's kind of like our dynastic agents there. Now the main troops within the detachment are the Rubic Marines. They carry -2 AP weapons at range, whether it's the Inferno bolt guns or the Warpfire flamers. These guys auto pass morale, lovely, and they've got their +1 to their saves against damage 1 weapons, great. Also, they can move and fire heavy weapons, which means that the option of taking a Soul Reaper cannon is actually workable, as it's a heavy weapon and it's strength 6, -3 AP, and they get 5 shots with it. And it's only 10 points, very cheap. And of course the Sergeant, otherwise known as an aspiring sorcerer, is of course a psyker who can cast and deny a single power. So already this is a tricky one, as our Necron warriors are damage 1, so using them instantly grants these guys a +1 to their armor save, giving them a 2+ armor save. But if you can do it with the Ghost Reapers at -2 AP, you'll be wounded on 3s, and the save will drop to a 4+. Now 40 shots will kill off 5.5 models, so it is still workable, and that's with the Mind will be done buff on them. Tomb Blades and Immortals work in a similar way, just at a better range with the Ghost weapons. Now Rubic Marines don't offer so much in melee, similar to how our Immortals actually work with 2 attacks each, so ideally we can catch them out with our melee units. Just consider that the unit can be stacked with Warp Flamers that auto hit in Overwatch, and of course a 5+ invulnerable save as standard. It's going to annoy units that are carrying weapons such as War Scythes because they're -4 AP weapons and they're not going to go through because of the 5+ invulnerable saves. Unfortunately this is going to be a theme throughout the Thousand Suns lists. Big AP weapons just aren't going to work. The -2 AP weapons are more of a sweet spot, sometimes -3 at a push depending on the cover saves. Now Cultists are the second troop option, but they don't have the Arcana Astartes keyword, so there's no 5+ invulnerable saves there. Thankfully, that would be too much, so we're a bit lucky there. However, the final troop option, which is worth a mention here, is the Tsangers. They're a cheap option, almost demon-like models with a 6+ armor save, and of course they do have the right keywords for the invuln save of a 5+. In fact, they kind of feel like a cultist unit, so that point I made earlier about us being lucky that there aren't cultists with invuns, yeah, I take that back. So you can get these guys on disc as well with the fast attack options. They're going to have a slightly better weapon skill and ballistic skill of a 3+, and also carrying diving spears at strength 5 and 2 damage as well, so pretty nasty, especially at the speed they go. If they don't want that, they can switch to the great bows, which ignore the Lookout Sir rule. So it's very important that we're aware of this one, because they're 30-inch range, they're only one shot, but it's strength 5 -1 AP, but they will wound on 2s even in Overwatch, so the strength doesn't really matter there. A max unit of these is 6, so it's not super crazy, but against our characters without an invuln save, such as a Necron Lord carrying a Resurrection Orb, or a Technomance for example, this could be crippling. We do thankfully have ways to ignore these weapons with Cryptothralls defending the Cryptex or Lichguard defending the Nobles, so bear both of those combos in mind if you're taking characters that are vulnerable. Next we've got the Scarab Occult Terminators. Admittedly these guys just look kind of cool, I'm a little bit jealous. They've got the standard Terminator stat line, then they've got the 5+ Terminator armor save, which they kind of already do get with the faction abilities. However, to compensate for that, GW are giving them objectives secured instead, which is crazy good for 3 wound models. Again, these guys are going to auto pass morale like with the Rubic dudes, and likewise, they're going to get a +1 to their armor save against damage 1 weapons. Now bear in mind Terminators start on a 2+ armor save, so this is going to go to a 1-up save, And that's before any light cover too, so even our warriors with the Reapers are only going to put them on a 3+ armor save. So if you're using the same amount of shots that we said earlier, 40 shots, with the Mine Will Be Done ability, that's going to be causing 7 or 8 wounds, which will kill around 2 and a bit there. But these guys are quite expensive, so it's not too bad. As for what they can do in return, well, of course they're going to have an Inspiring Sorcerer as a Psyker as standard. Then they've got the -2 AP Inferno Bolters, but they've got a crazy sounding melee weapon called the Prosperine Kopesh, which if you actually look that up, it's an Egyptian sickled sword, so it's pretty cool. These are Strength 5, -3 AP and 2 damage weapons, and with 3 attacks per model, they're going to be doing a little bit of work. That's killing full Lich Guard outright without the shields. But with objectives secured, that's going to be really key, especially paired with the deep strike ability that Terminators have. Now before talking about Magnus, there's one other option that we have to talk about, which is the Mutalith Vortex Beast. This monster is toughness 7 with 14 wounds, and D3 wounds are going to be regained each and every turn. To say that he has no range attacks would be true, but he does have a unique ability called the Warp Vortex, and has the option of selecting 2 out of 4 powers within a mini table. Now this does drop to 1 power and no powers when it's bracketed, and as you can see the powers are kind of similar to how our Catan Shard powers work. They're not psychic abilities and they're not shooting attacks. Yep, this faction gets a 145 point version of our Catan Shards. In melee it's an absolute nightmare too, 15 strength 7 attacks at -1 AP, or 5 strength 8 attacks at -2 AP with 3 damage. So if you see this on the battlefield, I'll be making it a priority to remove, unless of course there's a certain Primarch in the game, otherwise known as Magnus the Red. Where do we start? Let's start by running perhaps. So Magnus grants core units within 6 inches rerolls to their 1s as an aura, and then a single core unit or character unit within 6 can reroll everything. And Magnus is a character, so he's likely going to be selecting himself, and with his weapon skill and ballistic skill being a 2, he doesn't miss often. In the psychic phase he can cast 3 and deny 3 powers, and then he's got a few tricks up his sleeve to aid those psychic abilities. So first of all, he never perils. This ability actually gives him the 4+ invulnerable save too. Then when he's casting Smite, it's going to be D6 mortal wounds as opposed to D3. And if he rolls an 11 or more to Super Smite, it's going to be 3D3. Nasty. He gets to reroll all of his psychic tests, and then he's going to be adding 1 due to the detachment abilities, and furthermore, he has another 2 if he's got 10 wounds or more remaining. If he doesn't, he'll just add 1. This includes the Deny the Witch test too, so it's very easy for him to be super smiting, and even if he does get a 12 and perils, he can't actually peril, there's no perils there. So expect some mortal wound carnage coming into our Necron faction. It does get worse, he's actually got 3 Warlord traits, that's 3. The first allows him to reroll Deny the Witch test, and he can benefit from a second Kabalistic ritual, usually it's 1 per unit. The second is a -1 to all damage, so that's pretty much an Enduring Will on a Primarch. Then the third Warlord trait allows him to know an additional power. However, it then goes on to say that if it's Magnus, then he's going to know all the powers from all the disciplines he has access to. As for the movement, he's going to be moving 16 inches, and of course he can fly, and we've not even got into his actual attacks yet. So there's no ranged attacks thankfully, but in melee he's got 8 attacks at strength 16, -4 AP, damage 3, and if he doesn't kill the target that he's laid wounds upon, they're going to take an additional D3 mortal wounds. Pretty gross. When it comes to dealing with this kind of monster character, my go-to unit with the Necron book is the Nightbringer. Now I mentioned this when we did our Know Your Foe video for the Death Guard, when we talked about Mortarion. A lot of this section will be copy and paste, but basically in melee the Nightbringer hits on 2s as well, and on average from those 6 attacks the Nightbringer will hit with 5 of them. 2s will wound Magnus with the Entropic Blow profile because he's got strength 14 versus toughness 7, and without any saves whatsoever you're looking at approximately 4 wounds going through, each at D6 damage, but you got a -1 to all the dice due to one of Magnus's Warlord traits with the -1 to all damage. So on average you're going to be planting around 10 damage after all those effects, which will bracket him. And this of course is after all the Catan powers have been used too. You'd hope for 3 or more mortal wounds coming from the Catan powers there, all depends on what powers you take I guess. Let's say you did plant 3 mortal wounds at him, then you did the average of 10 damage in the fight phase, that's going to do 13 damage in total. I'd also spend the CP to get to use the dimensional destabilization stratagem for the extra power as well. Now we can focus fire on him with the other units within the battle and have a fair chance of removing him within a single turn. It just all depends on who gets to drop on who first. Remember the Catan Shard can only lose 3 wounds per phase, so he can't be taken out in a single fight phase. So Magnus only has the psychic phase and the fight phase to work on the Catan Shard, and is likely to be scoring 6 damage on the Nightbringer from those 2 phases. However, and this is a big however, we need to remember the shooting phase from other units within the Thousand Suns force. If Magnus is on a collision course with old 90, then the opposing player is extremely likely to throw everything they've got at the shard in the shooting phase, and they only need to find a way of removing 3 wounds from it. The psychic phase is almost a guarantee that the Nightbringer is going to be losing 3, and the fight phase I'd say is going to be losing 3 too. So the Nightbringer only has 9 wounds in total, so I'd say he can be taken out fairly easily in a single turn. Psychers are the Nightbringer's nemesis, but he is our best shot, but he can still crumble if you don't strike first. Okay, so that's most of the unique units available to the Thousand Suns. They still of course have some regular Chaos Marine options such as Chaos Spawn and the Demon Engines, but we'll save that for another day when we talk about the Chaos Space Marine faction. Now before we talk tactics, I wanted to point out a few really powerful options in terms of stratagems and relics. From the stratagem side of things, they've got the schemes of chain stratagem for 1 command point. So when you're playing a mission that has secondaries or agendas, after both players have revealed their selections, the Thousand Suns player can select one of their secondaries and exchange it for another one. So this is really useful. You get to see what your opponent selects, and then you've got the option of countering it. Now another cool option is Risen Rubrique for its 2 command points. This one's done during deployment. When you're setting up a Rubric Marines unit from the army, they can be set up anywhere in the battle that is more than 9 inches away from enemy units and enemy deployment zone. And this stratagem can only be used once. So effectively this is concealed positions if you know Space Marines. This is not a deep strike mechanic in the deployment pre-game. Also another stratagem that affects the deployment is Webway Infiltration. It's 2 command points, can go up to 3 command points if you take more than 1 unit, and you can take a Thousand Suns infantry unit into the webway and effectively will give them deep strike. So the reason I've mentioned these 2 in particular is just to show you how easy it is for other factions to do this sort of thing. When we're playing Necrons, we either need to pay a tax on a character holding the Veil of Darkness relic, and this only works on our minimal core units we have in our codex, so a character and a relic slot simply be gone, whereas a Thousand Suns player can just pop 2 command points on an infantry unit. Whether they're core or not core, they can still go into the webway. Admittedly, they don't have much in terms of infantry. Terminator's already got the deep strike, so it's only really the troops. Now alternatively, we do have the Night Sives to get the units into play, or the Nephric Dynasty. You can use the stratagem Translocation Crypt for 1 command point, again giving a unit deep strike unless they've got the vehicle or monster keywords. But I'd argue that the Nephric Dynasty is one of the worst we have in the codex at present. Now in terms of some neat relics, just wanted to mention a few here. Helm of the Demon's Eye is one of them that caught my eye. Each time your opponent uses a stratagem, if the bearer is on the battlefield, then they roll a 5+ to gain a command point, so nice farming for CP there. And then the next one is a little bit filthy. It's Paradoxical Chatterfowl. So on an infantry model only, at the start of the fight phase, they select an enemy unit within 3 inches of the bearer. You roll a d3. Then until the start of the next fight phase, they reduce the weapon skill and ballistic skill characteristics of that result. And then they also do it to the psychic tests, which don't affect us because we're Necrons. But imagine removing 3 from our ballistic skill or our weapon skill. And note that this isn't a modifier to the dice, because that would be capped at a -1. This is actually changes to the datasheet, so thankfully our stats do get returned in the following fight phase. Then the final one of note here is the Chronos Tutorum. So you put this on a model that's got a Warlord trait only. Once per battle in the command phase, you can give this model an additional Warlord trait from the Warlord traits list. So it's pretty much switching out a relic slot for a second Warlord trait, but they get to do it in the command phase once they've seen your list and seen the mission, and of course deployed as well. Okay, so let's move on to the second part of the video now in regards to some of the general tactics when dealing with the Thousand Suns. Now we've already seen that they're a very psycho reliant faction, as almost all of their traits and bonuses relate to gaining more psychic powers or casting them easier, or just more damage to those psychic abilities. Fortunately or unfortunately, we are not a psycho faction. Depends how you look at this. Yes, we can't deny those units as easily, but if we did have psychers, I think they just get denied over and over throughout the game. So I think this is more of a good thing for a Necron player as opposed to a bad thing. So in the intro, I alluded to the use of the Zarakan dynasty against the Thousand Suns. I think this is by far our strongest suit, and I'll explain why. So firstly, we ignore mortal wounds on a 5+. Now this is massive. With past codexes, this wasn't as big of a deal, but with each and every release, there seems to be more ways of throwing out mortal wounds, and Thousand Suns in particular are going to be throwing out tons of them due to their psychic abilities. So there's a 33.3% shrug on each mortal wound. That's going to be massive. The second reason is we've got a few anti-psycho tricks within this dynasty code. The first one being a stratagem Empiric Damping for 1 command point. Any Zarakan unit can deny a psychic ability on a 4+ that's within 18 inches of the Psyker. Then the second is the Silent King, who actually rules the dynasty, and he's got an inbuilt ability, so the Silent King can actually attempt to deny 1 psychic ability as if he was a Psyker. Now he synergizes pretty well with the Canoptic Spiders too, because they can repair him due to him being in the vehicle, and guess what, they've got access to a Gloom Prism, so in your opponent's psychic phase you can attempt to deny one psychic power as if you were a psyker. There are a few other units that we have with access to the Gloom Prism, which are coming from the Forge World models, the Canoptic's Tombstalker and the Canoptic Tomb Sentinel. Both of those have access to the Gloom Prism. Now by no means am I saying we're going to be fine by simply selecting this dynasty, as they also have ways of preventing our denies, and also with so many psykers it's going to be very easy for us to get caught in a pickle denying the wrong power. The way I would play against 1000 Suns is to simply go for the throat. They're not geared towards being a melee faction or a shooty faction, they just want to stand on objectives and use their Witchfire against us. So we can play shooty with our Mefrit or Sautek dynasties. Again, try and make the use of -2 AP weapons, possibly -3 AP weapons, because of those army-wide 5+ invulnerable saves. There's no need to pay tax on -4 AP weapons. So Warriors, Tombblades and Immortals, they're going to be firing pretty well. Now the issue we have with Warriors in particular is they cannot use their reanimation protocols against psychic attacks, because they only work against shooting attacks or melee attacks. So Smites, for example, are going to really ruin warrior heavy lists that are really reliant on reanimation. Thankfully, Resurrection Orbs, Ghost Arcs and Technomancers bring back previously dead models, so it's not going to affect those units, but your standard 5+ reanimation rerolling ones on Warriors will simply not apply. However, Warriors do have numbers in general, and they're going to eat up a lot of the Smite attacks. So when you compare them to Immortals, for example, Mortals won't last that long against a couple of focused Witchfire abilities aimed at them. Now a minion of 5 could be wiped out within a couple of smite attacks, or one super smite from Magnus, so I would definitely go with Warriors and take an orb on your Overlord when they get low, because they're going to be dropping models very quickly. Now not even our quantum shielding vehicles can ignore these powers, there's no wound rolls, so there's no minimum of a 4+ to wound us, and there's no invuln saves required for mortal wounds. So we're going to be purely relying on the amount of wounds we have within our vehicles. As far as melee goes, we can get into a fight and we would actually do pretty well, but Psykers still can smite into combat, and Wraiths and Lichguard with the invulns ain't going to prevent them. So I think we've got to hit hard and hit fast. That's our best play in my opinion. Usually we're a tough, slow, resilient faction that soaks up damage and systematically removes the enemies while we're mopping up points. But I think 1000 Suns just do it much better than us and at pace. But with the invuln save and the sheer amount of mortal wounds, we've just got to do it much quicker. So first turn could be extremely important to us, especially with an Alpha Strike, that's kind of needed here. So one team going in with the Veil of Darkness relic, then maybe a second team going in a Night Scythe. Both of those methods will protect those units, so they can't be targeted. I think it's better coming from our range attacks to guarantee the shots go in, because a failed charge will result in a loss on the spot. 20 Warriors with a Veil of Darkness and an Overlord with a My Will Be Done ability is probably the best method. I wouldn't bother with the Chronomancer today. The invuln save is just not worth it. Our guys need to be killing before they're actually killed, so hitting on 2s with 40 shots will hold more value. Get the second batch to fly in with the Flyer. Now there's no My Will Be Done there because you need the command phase to do that. And of course within the Flyer, the Overlord can't be using that ability. I think it could be a solid day out for a Plasmancer. This is our most aggressive Cryptek. He's basically a Psyker without being a Psyker, isn't he? He's popping out mortal wounds and they can't be denied. Also I think we need Scarabs, partially for the screening for the smite attacks, because they have to target the nearest enemy models, but also to soak up the mortal wounds. With 12 wounds for 45 points, that's easily our best unit to tank it, and if they don't target the Scarabs, well guess what, they're going to be holding primaries. We're likely going to be needing a Nightbringer to stand the chance against Magnus. Now the issue is Magnus is much quicker, and will pretty much always get the jump on our Catan Shard, so he will need to be screened until it's time for him to make the charge. Now there is one weakness that the 1000 Suns do have, which is the Psyker range. A lot of the psychic powers are between 12 and 24 inches. This actually makes our heavy support a good option for once. Now the Doomsday Arcs and the Canoptic Doomstalkers in particular, I don't usually tend to find the big weapons at infantry units, but this may be an exception here, especially with the blast ability. And also the heavy destroyers have also got the range, so these could be valuable too. This makes our Mefrit dynasty a pretty decent option, even for our regular Locust destroyers with the Gorse cannons, or while potentially using a Triax Stalker to use its target relay on the right units. You target the Psykers in threat order, Magnus of course being priority number 1, then you work your way down the list to the Sorcerers, then the smaller units. If there's a Lookout Sir bubble shielding those characters, then you simply got to remove the shields too, which will likely contain Psykers anyway. Or if you really wanted to get those characters off nice and early, we've got the Death Marks. They will have to go through the invuln save, but they've got the -2 AP weapons, and they've also got the distance with it at strength 5 as well. If you can stay out of those psychic ability ranges, you should be doing fairly well. Okay guys, so hopefully your knowledge has been slightly improved in terms of understanding how the 1000 Suns operate, and hopefully I've assisted you with your Necron units, giving you a better chance of defeating the 1000 Suns. Before we leave guys, we're going to do our shout out of the day, which is going to Minimum Asubage, and they're really enjoying the list reviews, and they're asking if we're going to be doing something similar for the Space Marines, which we will be doing some list builds with the Space Marines, but we still haven't finished all the reviews. There's so many more units with the Space Marines when you compare them to the Necron, so we're still making our way through those unit reviews. Now if you're enjoying these kind of videos, be sure to do all the usual stuff by subscribing and liking the video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.